This is A Few Good Fights. I'm your host Rob, and I'm joined by Sean as always.
Yeah, boy.
We're going to be joined by Chuck Mindenhall of The Athletic in a couple of seconds, but first, we did run into some issues. Sean pressed record and was recording beautifully with Chuck Mindenhall, and then when we turned off the record and when we stopped the recording, it failed. It was lost. It was lost.
Yes.
But this is a great conversation with Chuck. We talk about a lot of things, a lot of big MMA news. So
Chuck's brilliant, man.
Chuck's brilliant. Let's get into it. So we're now joined by Chuck Mindenhall of The Athletic and also of the Man and the Myth podcast. If you haven't checked out either, go check them out because they're awesome. Chuck, thanks for coming on. And there's plenty of news to talk about today. But yeah, thanks for coming on again because it's always good crack, as we say over here.
Oh yeah, man. What's it been, like 6 weeks?
Something like that. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Your call, man. I've been waiting for your call, so I'm happy to be back on, guys.
Cheers. So jumping straight into the news, this question seems to come up every single time that we talk. It's not Conor McGregor, but it's Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. It's a weird one because it's a topic that you have to talk about because it's so important in the division, but it's the same thing every time. Is this going to happen? Is this actually going to happen? Or how big is this fight? But what I want to know is, when you were looking at this fight from a writer's perspective, how do you see it in the lead up? How do you look at it, as in, what would the pre-fight column be? What's the hook to this fight? Is it that it hasn't happened and maybe it will happen, or what is it?
Oh man. Well, from my personal perspective, I feel like the idea would be to never write about it or talk about it, do anything about it until you see them walking into the cage. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm at that point because the last couple of times when I was actually still writing for The Ringer, and I would write these big kind of extravagant pieces because each time they've booked this fight, it's become bigger, right? Like it's kind of gotten into a bigger and bigger space. And so there is always this, man, I hope it happens this time. So by the time you get to the fifth time and you've seen those pieces become like obsolete in real time as they run, and you're like, well, that piece is no good anymore because it's not happening at the 11th hour type thing. The idea is now, like, how do you not jinx it? How do you not do it? That's just from like being funny, but there is an element of truth to that. Like you feel like you got to see it happen now. There's just skepticism around that bit of matchmaking that you wonder if you'll ever see it. And I feel like the fight, because it's only escalated in the collective mind of the fight game, like it feels like it's doubly in jeopardy of never happening just because we want it that badly. So I guess I'm tapering you're just kind of keeping it low for now. Hopefully they all sign the paperwork and hopefully it happens. That's the only message I guess I'd put out there right now.
Basically, it's the hope that kills you, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the hope, man.
Yeah.
So many people are protective of ever really getting too involved with sports teams and things like that. It says they just don't want to have their heart trampled on time and again. You know what I mean? And I feel like this is one of the closest things we have in the fight world to something like that, where you're like, oh, I don't even want to get my hopes up anymore.
Yeah, it's weird. It is like a team, isn't it? It's like Tony and Khabib are our own little team that we're all trying to support, even though they're going to go in there and beat the hell out of each other.
I was joking with Rob earlier. I was like, we should just wrap these guys in cotton wool. They don't train for the fight. We just put them in a cage and that's it. Yeah. Leave them at it.
Yeah. We don't care about weight. Yeah. Just let it happen.
I like it.
Yeah. Is this, you did mention it there, but is this obviously it keeps getting bigger every time, but when this does happen, and hopefully it does happen, and it's scheduled for April.
Yeah.
Is this the biggest it's ever been? I mean, like, it's probably, the answer's probably yes, but like, was there any other time when this could have happened where you're like, actually, that was probably the perfect time for this to happen?
I don't think so, man. I think that literally in each incarnation of this matchmaking, the fight has gotten bigger. The stakes have gotten more. I think it all just kind of goes down to the fact that you've almost had it that many times, right? And then you don't get it. That, first of all, serves into this like, oh my God, I hope we get that at some point in our lifetime, that sort of thing. But then you get to the point where Nurmagomedov has now entered the space of like kind of pound for pound great. Still undefeated, still as dominant as ever, and now holding the title. And then you have Tony, who had an interim title, who's won 12 in a row or whatever it is at this point. It's just they keep adding notches as they go along. And I think that you've never seen such a sustained like two heads of momentum so sustained heading toward each other for this amount of time. I feel like it's like a tension rod at this point. You want to see that, you want to finally see it what happens when they come together in the cage. And the stakes are as big as ever. I think that Nurmagomedov at this point is probably you guys tell me, man, because I can't tell the temperature in Ireland and things like that. But he seems to me like he might want to be maybe the biggest star going right now. So I feel like you also have that kind of factoring into that scenario. Yeah,
I think so. Like I mean, over here, it's kind of weird because you get fans who are only really interested in the big fights. Like once a fight that isn't that interesting comes up, nobody's really talking about it. But it seems like when Khabib does fight, that's when people get interested. And that's another question I had. Does it get anywhere near the McGregor-Khabib level in terms of excitement and I guess buy rate? We're not really sure. I'm not even sure what that is. I'm not sure if it's been released or it's been rumoured. Right. Yeah. But does it get anywhere close to that?
Man, I don't think so. I don't think so because if in the build up to that other fight, I always feel like you got to have like an almost element of the supernatural in play, and I felt like that's what Conor kind of brought. You just weren't sure. Like even remember that Malkovich, that big intro they put out where it's like the thing that always, it's like you look at that sort of thing and you're like, wow, this is really feeding on some kind of mystique as well. Like you had both kinds of mystique in play. And then there was like the logical mind that says Khabib is probably a nightmare matchup for McGregor, but there kept happening to be like this. Yeah, but it's McGregor. It's McGregor. If anybody's going to show up and shock the world, it'd be McGregor. And I feel like those two things just kind of played out the whole way. It made it into this very big feeling event. And I think this one, given the fact that it's fallen through 4 times, there will be skepticism if it's going to happen. And I think when people finally kind of get their minds around the idea that it's going to happen, let's say that it gets there, I feel like there'll be kind of a late excitement that will attach itself to that, but I don't think it's going to enter that stratosphere, honestly, of that kind of buzz. I mean, you guys were out there, right? Like it's that kind of buzz you get once every, I don't even know. I feel like that was probably one of the biggest fights in UFC history. Yeah. And I'm not sure you can just kind of replicate that by playing one of the players. It was both guys that brought their their levels of doubt and their levels of greatness into that cage. Tony just doesn't have that exact same translation that McGregor does. Yeah, and I think as well, like the fact that McGregor and Khabib legitimately hated each other, like that was real.
It was genuine.
It was genuine, and I'm not sure. Like I know, Khabib and Tony have the back and forth over the last few years, but I don't think there's actual hate there. I think it's more so on Khabib's side, at least. I want to beat the best guys, and Tony is that best guy. And I think fans do gravitate more towards these guys really hate each other. I think there's still something with a fist fight that fans want that.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that Tony, if anything, has kind of emerged over time as like this kind of cultish figure, very kind of esoteric, like his training methods are just kind of different. Like he's kind of a kook, right? He's like the kook of the fight game. And it like certainly within the bubble of MMA, I think that people appreciate a guy like that. I don't know how much outside of it. But in terms of their interaction, I feel like there's just like a level of frustration that it's never happened. I feel like there's like even skepticism that extends to both of those guys that it will happen. So I think that you got to kind of overcome a stigma first. And once that happens and you really believe that this fight is going to take place, and hopefully that happens during fight week, although we've seen it fall apart during fight week too. Hopefully by that time it has everything that has matured over the course of this series, because it feels like this full-blown rivalry that's just never happened yet. I hope it all comes to the fore at that point and seems like a really, really big event at that point.
Yeah. What happens if Tony Ferguson wins? Because I've heard a lot of people talk about this and whether they do an immediate rematch because of how dominant Khabib has been. I guess it depends on the result, but like I'm not sure I've really thought about the fact that Tony Ferguson could win this fight.
Yes, well, you're doing it correctly because you don't want to contemplate anything about the eventuality of what happens after the fight. You just focus on the fight. But that is a great question, man. And this tells you how serious I am. I'm like, I try not to even contemplate that far, but I know what you're saying. There's a great chance, right? That I mean, I've talked to, you mentioned the man in the myth, my guy on there, Sean Al-Shadi, already predicting that Tony Ferguson will win this fight. So I feel like that there's going to be plenty of that. And the fact is, he should have a very legitimate chance. Probably the strangest matchup that Nurmagomedov, the toughest matchup in a lot of ways. I think that the fight should be fascinating, right? And if that happens, if Tony Ferguson wins and it's some kind of close battle, I mean, I could see them doing it again, especially if it does big numbers, especially if it does the big numbers and it's competitive and there's just something about it that compels you to want to see it again. I think the only way you don't see something like that is if Tony goes right through him. But I think that that's like the most extreme scenario that you could probably come up with in this fight.
Yeah, I think you're right as well. I think the fact that he's such a weird fighter, he's strange, it's hard to pin exactly what he does well down. I think that's probably the best, style that could be Khabib, because Khabib seems to do well against everybody, but against Tony, you don't really know what he's going to do. So it's kind of it's interesting in that way.
It's true, and I feel like Nurmagomedov does. I mean, Nurmagomedov is like, he fights. He'll surprise you in there, but everybody knows what his bread and butter is going to be, which is he's going to try to pummel you on the ground. He's going to try to get you into situations where he's got you neutralized, and he's going to pummel you. Tony Ferguson is one of the weirdest, wiry, spring-loaded guys off, in scrambles and things like that. That becomes fascinating when you start to think about that clash. Who's going to dictate who's well, and who will break the other guy down over the course of 5 rounds. I just hope it happens, fellas. I mean, it's a good one, and I think, honestly, this thing has reached the highest it possibly can go at this point. I don't think that you could make it at a better time than right now.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you want the early odds?
Yeah, what are
they? So in European odds, Khabib is a 1-2 favourite, which is minus 500, I believe. Is that right?
I think so.
And then Tony is 13-8.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, quite a large favourite actually.
That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
it's hard to disagree with.
It's hard to disagree. Habib's been so dominant, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically just trying to split the betting difference, right? And I think that right now the perception is, as much as anybody, that Nurmagomedov has the sheen of invincibility. Yeah. Somebody has to kind of show that he has a weakness, and not too many people have been able to do that. So that makes sense to me. That line makes sense.
Yeah. Dustin Poirier said that he is interested in getting on the card. He's still, quite high in the rankings. He only fought Khabib not too long ago. Is there anybody that jumps out that could fight Dustin on a Khabib-Tony undercard? I know, like, if you look at it and you say, like, remove everything, like, Poirier-McGregor rematch does make a whole lot of sense, especially if it's under that, because, like, it just adds to the card. But, that's not going to happen. But is there anyone else?
Man, who else is in that top space right now? I'm trying to think who's up there. There's guys like Paul. To be honest, man, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. I remember writing the column right after that Poirier fight and thinking that was it just made the most sense to have McGregor, and obviously, like, it doesn't seem like that will happen.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
Yeah, you have Gaethje, Cerrone, Felder, Hooker. Like,
none of them have. I mean, it's tough because none of them obviously are going to have that kind of appeal. And if you had, this is all in Brooklyn, right? We're talking about this fight card. I mean, it has. I don't know. You're probably right. It wouldn't happen. But can you imagine how big it would be if you had that foursome in play? The co-main and the main. I think that would be like a massive, massive event. But given the fact that it was Brooklyn that McGregor showed up in and tried to throw the dolly through the window, I seriously doubt that's going to be the case. If it's Poirier, though, I wouldn't mind seeing a guy like Gaethje. I just don't think that it makes the most sense. Like Gaethje kind of being where he's at this moment. I don't know if that would make the most sense, but I feel like Poirier, man, even in a loss, he's probably at the highest he's ever been in terms of marketing. I think he's handled himself so well. And hopefully they give him, whoever they put him against, man, I hope it's somebody that kind of keeps that spotlight on him the right way. Yeah,
I agree. So let's move on from that and stop jinxing it. John Jones versus Dominic Reyes was announced for UFC 247. A very different title fight than the Khabib versus Tony one. Not a huge amount of fanfare around it, but it's probably, I guess, the right fight to make for John Jones at this point.
Yes. I agree with what you just said about the fanfare. We even had an internal discussion at The Athletic, like, hey, should we do some kind of reaction off of it? And there was just a very mild feeling of like, nah, there's nothing about it that's compelling enough to do that sort of thing. So it reminds me of when Anderson Silva was kind of fighting. I always say the woodwork contenders, but like the guys who they were part of a meritocracy, but they were kind of like guys you had to squint to understand how they might challenge. Like, it was one of those type of things. He went through a series of those guys, and it was like his coasting moment of greatness, where it's like, oh, we can just keep booking him into guys, keep him busy, and get him rolling, and all that, that sort of thing. I feel like we're in that phase of John Jones' career, because after coming off of, Anthony Smith, and then Thiago Santos, whom he almost lost to, obviously, and I'm like, for whatever reason, Dominic Reyes is just not a sexy name, and there weren't a lot of options. But, I mean, Dominic Reyes is just not that sexy of a name to plug into the next as his next challenger. you kind of wanted to see if he was, there's this feeling that guys who are supposedly great, that we talk about as great, should be doing great things. They should be trying to express their greatness at all times. I'm not sure that this fight does that for Jon Jones at this point. But the one compelling thing is that Thiago Santos fight, I feel like Jon Jones keeps fighting not to lose at this point rather than to win. He's not trying to showcase how great he is. He's just fighting not to lose, fighting smart. Those types of things add just enough of an element of like, well, if he plays that complacency into a fight with Dominic Reyes, he may get stung in a fight like that. Now, am I squinting and am I trying to look at it a certain way? Yes, but I think that that's right now where the most compelling part of this fight is.
Yeah, like I completely agree. It does look a lot like Anderson Silva back in the day. And like for a long time, everyone was saying, let Anderson Silva move up, or they were looking for the GSP fight or whatever it was. And then Chael Sonnen came around. So you'd hope that Dominic Reyes would be someone like that. Maybe he's a guy with, Gustafsson gave Jon Jones a really tough fight back in the day. And, a lot of people were laughing that the UFC were promoting his size. But you have something similar here. And you have Jon Jones, who hasn't been that impressive lately. But yeah, I think you're right. It's hard to look at this and say, yeah, this is a big fight. This is really a challenge for Jon Jones because, the Ozdemir fight happened 2 fights ago.
You're exactly right. And I think that particular fight is what adds this element of like, that meh feeling, because we saw that fight. It didn't distinguish him very much. And then you had other contenders who've been fighting recently. We were talking about Johnny Walker possibly sneaking in, a guy who's going to actually bring some of the fanfare to the event, and they didn't get through. So I feel like in some ways he's a kind of like consolation to this situation. And I'm like, it's great that he was able to kind of smoke, go right through Chris Weidman and look good in that fight. I think that this is going to be a little bit more of a tough sell in terms of a big event or anything like that. Jon Jones at this point, man, I think he has to, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take. I think we're just in this, there were so many little hiatuses of his career, and now he's kind of back in action, but he's fighting guys that just aren't doing it. I don't know why, but like, I think from a fan's perspective, at some point he's going to have to look at the guys that make sense to him in terms of if we're going to consider him the greatest and all this, the guys who are going to fit the bill of making him the greatest. Yeah,
like I hope that Dominic Reyes is as good as like a lot of people say he is, and I think he's a really good fighter. But it feels like the Chris Weidman win almost like puts a band-aid over what we've seen in the Ozdemir fight. It didn't really tell us a whole lot. It was early, and we don't really know how good Chris Weidman is anymore. But yeah, I think Jon Jones, like that's one of the questions I had was, it seems like right now he's in a position where like GSP was when he was running through everybody, except Jon Jones doesn't really have, the backlog of contenders that GSP did. Like they kept rolling at welterweight. There was loads of interesting ones. So it was like, he's not going to middleweight, but at least he can fight this guy, and Jake Shields comes in, this guy. But like Jon Jones doesn't seem to have that. So do you almost think that, as you said, it's kind of time for him to start looking up, because he is 32. He's still young, but he has like 26 fights. He's been through some tough ones, and also he's had some problems with USADA, and you never know when that's going to creep back up, and maybe he's going to regret not taking these huge fights at, say, heavyweight.
I agree with you 100%, and there's a part of me that thinks about all the millions he squandered during all of these, these years at this point that he did not fight. All those big money fights, including UFC 200, going back to that, like there were just a lot of opportunities where he could have made a lot of money. I feel like he could put himself in a position, if you're looking at it strictly from a business standpoint, an entrepreneurial standpoint, like he could be putting himself into fights where he makes a lot more money. We'll see what happens. Maybe you never know exactly the dealings going on in something like this. I can't hate on the fact that they're trying to keep the division moving. I feel like that's the original model. You're supposed to bring up the guys. It's supposed to be a meritocracy. It's supposed to have all that. But we all know that we live in a different UFC era right now, and that is not really kind of the default way of doing business. That's not really the paradigm anymore. So it feels like if you want to, you could justify this fight, and it would make sense. But if you look at it from a entertainment standpoint and from a marketing and a prospect of building an event and hype and hyperbole and all that, it's what you said when we started. I don't think it has that. It just doesn't have that.
Jones is such a weird one for me, because if you look at combat sports, MMA, boxing throughout the years, guys always talk about going up and taking belts, and Jones just doesn't really talk about it that much. It's such a weird one.
Yeah, it's a strange one.
He used to do it, and
he
I felt like it was one of those things that felt inevitable. And this is going back years ago, obviously. Like he'd been talking about it. It seems like he's cooled on the idea over the course of time, over all these suspensions and everything else. It's almost like he has decided, or maybe it almost comes across as defiance or stubbornness at this point, that he doesn't want to try that. But obviously, that's the way for him. That is the way to kind of recapture that galvanizing force that we saw coming up in the light heavyweight division. You want to be able to see that guy going into heavyweight with that same mindset. I'm not sure at this point. I'm not holding my breath that we'll get that. I think eventually, when it comes down to it, we'll see him fight a guy in the heavyweight division, or that's going to seem big. But the fact that he's kind of downplaying it and all of that, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon. Yeah,
it's weird. It's disappointing that, like, perhaps the greatest fighter in the world, you're not really interested in his fights. It's a weird scenario. It's weird. But you'd wonder, like, has he spoke with the UFC, and when they offered him maybe fights at heavyweight, the deal wasn't very good, and he was like, no, I'll just fight these guys. It's all the same to me.
I think probably it is something like that. Yeah. I mean, obviously we're not in on the negotiations, but my sense of it is that it is something like that. Remember, he teased like months ago, like, big news coming soon. Yeah. And what that was, it never came out soon, and now we're left with this. So in another way, he's kind of teasing. Through the course of time, he teases out something big, and then he gets something like this. I guess it feels a little anticlimactic. Yeah, it does. Great segue, though, because Nick Diaz was on Instagram, and he said he had big news coming soon as well. And he said that he's fighting soon. Now, this was a weird Instagram video. It looked like he was outside a nightclub about to kick some guy in the nuts. I'm not sure what it was. It was weird.
Classic Diaz stuff.
Yeah. But he said he's going to fight soon. And, this has been debated from everybody since Nick had that interview with Ariel. But right now, where are you feeling on, or how are you feeling on a Nick Diaz return to the cage?
Man. I had a discussion about this recently, too, with Sean. And it's tough, man, because I'm a believer that the fight game is better with the Diaz brothers in it. Like, it's just, there's something about it, even in the weirdness. Like, I was at the UFC in Montreal when Diaz fought GSP, and just the fact that press conference at the Bell Center in that little room was one of the strangest things ever. He's talking about the toxic, airplane water and all the, conspiracy things, and I was like, boy, the fight game, it just reaches a different level when Nick is involved, man. Like, I really liked it, but here's the other part, man. Like, leave the interview aside for a minute with Ariel. Like, I felt like, because he has these social phobias, he has these anxieties, and obviously, I think, he's been out partying, and I think he's a different guy than we remember. Like, he's a different place. He's a different guy. It's been a long time since we've seen him. I like the idea that we weren't hearing from him. That kind of his legend was growing. Remember, during that whole suspension, the free Nick Diaz, it sort of reached this kind of new level of his cult status that only helped his brother, by the way. Like, it helped his brother. And then his brother's keeping his name alive by saying, in little moments, in little promos, like, Nick Diaz is the best fighter ever and things like that. I liked that we were just kind of building this myth around Nick Diaz, and I wanted to keep it there. And I felt like the best way for that would he just becomes almost like a J.D. Salinger figure who doesn't speak. He just kind of shows up at certain events. You never really hear from him. Maybe you see him at the club, on his Instagram, things like that, but you don't hear from him. I thought the worst part was seeing him and hearing his interview, because it brought it all back to some strange reality where you're like, oh, man, you know what? No, I don't need to see that. I don't need to see this guy fight. You wonder about the damage he's sustained over the course of his career. And, there's a lot of things. I also feel like it puts him through hell to have a fight. I think there's parts of him that get, it's when he sees the BMF belt and he's not a part of it, I think that he's like, that's my belt. Like, he really does believe that. So there's a private hell that he lives through, but that he's not involved. But I think he goes through a bigger hell when he's involved. So it's hard to be like, let's put the guy through hell and stick him in a fight, because I feel like that's what we do. Now, having said all of that, I would totally watch a Nick Diaz fight.
I always say this to Rob, we're such hypocrites as fans.
Yeah, absolutely.
At least I admit it. I'm always up front. I know nothing in this sport, and I'm a hypocrite. That's okay.
Yeah, no, I feel exactly the same. It's like you want to analyze everything. You're like, oh, I hope he's okay and all this. But if they announce the fight, just like, and kind of the next question or next news topic is similar to this. It's like if they announce it, and even if Nick Diaz isn't at the top of his game, it's still Nick Diaz. It's still interesting. It's different, and we want to see it. It's one of those things.
The greatest testament to who he is as a fighter, besides his brother being in there and that sort of thing, but the fact that we still think of him at all. This is a guy who's 36 years old, hasn't competed in nearly 5 years, hasn't won a fight since 2011, and even when he won that fight in 2011, it was against BJ Penn, who hasn't won a fight since 2010. And yet we're still talking about him right now with a sense of like pending anticipation and excitement about whether he should return. I mean, to me, it's a testament to how great he is that we're even in this spot to be talking about him. Yeah, and he's done a thing where he's built this fan base that is so loyal. Like I made it's just a comment. I was like, Nate Diaz calls Nick the greatest fighter in the world, and of course he's not the greatest fighter in the world, but he's Nick Diaz, he's great. And so many people on YouTube were like, he is the greatest fighter in the world. Shut up, you know nothing.
Yeah, it's this mystique that's around him. It's so cool, and it's only worsened when they are in public and make public appearances.
Yeah, it's great. I love
Only in fighting can delusion thrive as much as it does. You know what I mean? Like, you can't do that in other sports. You just can't make those claims that your team is the best when they're simply not the best. But in fighting, because of all the math that goes into it, and everybody's passions and stuff, you can just say whatever you want. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Tyson Fury has been in the news. He's talking about getting into MMA potentially, and Darren Till said today or yesterday, whenever it was, that there's a 70% chance of him trying MMA. But this just reminded me, because I've been catching up on The Athletic, and I actually read an article from you today, Chuck, the one about the novelty fights.
Oh, yeah, right.
Amazing. Loved it. Brilliant article. But this kind of reminded me of it, because it's like everybody's talking about, say, Floyd Mayweather and complaining, like, all MMA media and all of us and whatever, and we're saying, how awful it is, we don't want to see it. But yet we're still talking about it because it's different, and it's like, it's unique. It's not, as you said, the random fight night that nobody cares about that was on a few weeks ago. So what's your thoughts on Tyson Fury? And I guess, do you agree that, this is such a bad thing for MMA that Tyson Fury's talking about getting in?
So let me just address real quick. Like, it's a funny thing, because within the bubble, we love to say, like, man, I'm so sick of these. I have zero interest in these crossover fights. And I think that for good reason. You could say that, and you could point to a competitive nature because if one guy goes to the other's realm, obviously the guy's realm that you're fighting in is the one who's going to be the favorite, and it's really not a competitive situation. I get all that. The problem is our bubble is not what dictates this sort of thing. It's it's the media sources that are kind of emanating beyond our bubble. It's like TMZ. It's all of the bigger outlets that kind of draw the broader interest in terms of talking about this, and then it seeps back through, right? Like, because Tyson Fury is at a level where he can talk about something like that and it's going to be headlines. And I feel like because there's so much headline driven stuff within MMA, because they're competing for clicks and stuff like that, we have to talk about it. It becomes like this this self-fulfilling, it just fills itself. The drama builds on itself, and it becomes something you have to discuss. Now, you don't have to like it. I personally don't like it very often, but in Tyson Fury's case, I'm a little more intrigued than I would be within other guys, other people. Like when, Clarissa Shields was basically talking about the Amanda Nunes one, that has some appeal to me. Like there's, she's very young. She's got plenty of time, regardless if it's boxing or MMA, however you want to do that. Tyson Fury's only 31. Here's the problem, though. I feel like he's used to a certain amount of money, right? And
to fight low-level guys in boxing.
Yes, those two things make him who he is, and it makes him bold in spirit. So what humbles you in spirit is actually when you go try it. So if he really goes and tries it, if he really wants to fight in MMA, I would be intrigued, given his age. I don't know where his hunger and his passion would lie, but the fact that he's that kind of boxer, and he's a big guy, which I think it can translate. And as long as, he's going to dedicate himself a little bit to the other aspects of it, I would be a little more intrigued than if, say, if Floyd Mayweather at any point had tried to do this, come over to MMA or anything like that. I would be lying if I said I wasn't slightly intrigued. And to me, it is fun to talk about a guy like Tyson Fury, who, he's going to have to do better than he did against Braun Strowman, though. He's going to have to be better than that. But to me, he's got a little bit more appeal than some of the other ones that we hear. I don't have there's nothing about me that wants to see Jorge Masvidal go fight Canelo in a boxing.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be a shit show.
Yeah, it'd be insane. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a weird one. But like people talk about it.
I watched the podcast actually with Tyson Fury today, and he said he has 3 fights left on his contract with Top Rank.
Yep.
Okay.
And after that, and I quote, he's coming for every one of the top UFC heavyweights. Yeah, including Ngannou, including Stipe.
I can appreciate that he was going after Stipe Miocic and Francis Ngannou,
I know,
which to me, there are very few guys within the heavyweight division itself already existing in the UFC where guys are calling out those types of names and are willing to go and stand in a cage, a locked cage with them. So I'm all about. I like his adventurousness of spirit in that sense.
He didn't go and call out Andrei Arlovsky or someone like that.
yeah. Although he did comment on the Ray Mercer, Tim Sylvia fight. I noticed that.
He did.
So he's doing his homework.
Yeah.
It's a weird one, but like it makes sense in a way. Like when the UFC are the same promotion that will allow CM Punk to fight, why aren't they entertaining Tyson Fury, who can actually fight?
He's also going to get 5 times less money to do it.
Yeah, like it's not. Yeah, that's the big problem.
Yeah.
I think that Dana would absolutely entertain this as soon as it's available. Like there was a tweet that Tyson had put out where he's training with Till and Dana White put out the little looky eyes or whatever. So you know he's on his radar. You know what I mean? Yeah,
of course. And the higher ups as well are like, get this guy in. Let's get some money. So Luke Rockhold as well. He's in the news, and he's saying that he's not retired, but he's happy not fighting at the moment, and he'd only return if maybe a 195-pound division came around. What do you take from this, Chuck? Do you like that Luke is kind of retired-ish?
I think that yes. I mean, on hold, yes. On hold, I think, and also to put like the stipulation that I will only fight if it's in this like made up division that probably won't exist anytime soon. That basically tells me that he's not interested in fighting anytime soon, and maybe never again. I think that it's after watching him get knocked out against Romero and then against Jan in his last fight, at his debut at 205. It's tough. There are certain guys who, when you see them get knocked out and it looks so violent, you're like, ooh, you don't need to do this, man. You don't need to do this, because he's got other options.
Especially a guy like Luke.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's a guy who actually his appearance matters for his other gigs. Like he can model, he can do all that stuff. At some point, I think that your common sense would override your need to compete. And I think that's where he's at now. Will it reverse at some point because his career has went the way it has, and we start to feel good again in the sense of like getting in the gym and starting to train and all that? Yes, I think that's inevitable because he's young enough. I think at some point he'll want to get back in there. It'd be interesting. I don't think he should go to 185. It's got to be. I think he should train at 205, but he's gonna. Maybe they get him against a guy who's not going to try to take his head off. There aren't a lot of those at 205, but maybe they put him in a fight where the guy's a little bit more of a grappler or something like that, just to get him rolling again if he decides to do it. But all indications, man, is we may not see him for a year or two before he even considers something like that. Yeah, like I really like Chuck Mindenhall. I really like Luke Rockhold, but like when I read this, like my takeaway from it was he seems like he's dismissing maybe that. Something else was at play rather than the weight. Like it seems like he's blaming the weight. Like he said that he can fight at 185 because the weight cut kills him, and now he doesn't want to fight at 205. Didn't give a reason, but he's like, but maybe I'll fight at 195. It's like he's trying to like have an excuse that the weight was too much, and maybe it was. Maybe he would compete better at 195, but it's almost like he's dismissing the fact that he did get clocked and his hands weren't up and he didn't get out of the way of that punch. You know what I mean? Yes, I do. I know exactly what you mean. I think that's part of his mentality, to be honest, too. Like,
and a lot of fighters.
Yeah, him specifically, though. He stews over, like, when he lost to Bisping, and Bisping's doing his victory lap with the belt and going off and doing all this stuff. Like, who was the guy who was just, stewing in the background of it? It was Rockhold, right? And I think that he puts it in his mind. I think this is part of his competitive rebounding nature, is to put it in his mind that there are extenuating circumstances that maybe made it the way it is. But I think the dose of he's going to have to sit on that for a while and let it sink in, because I think the real reality, right? Like the real reality is he's getting knocked out, and how much more do you want to do that? I think that's where he's at. I don't know if the weight cut did not help, and killing himself to get down to 185 might have diminished him in some way over the course of time. So 205 would be the only way, unless they do invent this division he's talking about, or a catchweight. But 205 is the only place he should be. But his broader problem is like, how much more do I want to get knocked out like that? How many more times do I want to end up wondering where I'm at when I come to?
There was a really interesting tweet after Luke and Chris both got knocked out, and it was kind of just like looking at their careers since they fought, and basically how much they probably left in the octagon after their fight.
Yeah, I was actually at that fight, and it's
insane what you can leave in a fight, in a war like that.
Yeah,
it's like the Robbie Lawler, back when he was the champ. The Johnny Hendricks was a shell of himself. Carlos Condit. You know what I mean? Rory McDonald, even to an extent. Like, all these guys, they showed up in diminished forms after those wars. And now Robbie Lawler, too, obviously. But it's like, man, we love these 5-round wars. We love the fact that they go in and they put it on the line. But it does, I really believe this, man. I think it really does take a toll. It makes you come back a different person the next time through.
I agree.
Yeah, another great segue, Sean. Chris Weidman as well is in the news. It's kind of a different story, and this is actually the last story, so I'm leaving it on almost a bad note. We'll see. He says he's going to return to the octagon in February, or that's what he wants. Now, Chris Weidman is 1 in his last 6, so he has 1 win in his last 6, which isn't great, and he has a lot of pretty bad knockouts there. Lost to the same guy that Luke, of course, lost to. What's your reaction when you see that Chris Weidman wants to continue? I know he said it in the cage, and I know he said it after the fight, but what's your reaction to that?
I think it's like when he started to lose, it was like he was chasing, and he's had multiple. I think he said he had 23 surgeries since going back all that time, and it's been a ridiculous spiral. But I think originally when he lost, I got the sense he was trying to chase his glory. He was trying to get back to the glory, and each loss puts him at a further orbit from wherever he thinks he should be. And I think that's a disconnect at some point. You're like, I don't think he can recapture where he was. It feels like a million years ago that he did those things to Anderson Silva, that whole series and the Vitor Belfort fight and all that. It feels like such a long time ago. But I feel like he believes he's always just an inch from recapturing it all and doing away with the building history in between. And I think that's the concern. It's you're watching a guy who is he hasn't been the same, and I know he wants to get it back, and you want to see him get it back, but you also don't want to see him like feeding some kind of delusion that will just extend forever. I think that Kelvin Gastelum fight, if it doesn't happen, if that one was a loss, obviously we're talking about Chris Weidman we're not even talking about him anymore, but he snuck that one in, and I'm like, that to his credit.
Yeah.
And it rebuilt like something in him that he thought he could get it back. And I keep seeing these realities pounded home to him in real time on these shows. And I guess I would have been okay if he said, that's it, I'm done. Because the guy has done more than in MMA than most guys, 98% of guys will do. He was the one who, dethroned Anderson Silva, which will live with, he'll have that forever. I kind of hope if he goes in there and he has another bad showing that he does contemplate what we're talking about. I hope that he kind of gets his mind around that situation. It's a tough one, man. I'm not saying he can't turn things around, but I don't think he'll ever get that old glory back. I don't think he can at this point.
If you're his team, does someone need to be in his ear and maybe have an award, or what's your thoughts on that?
That's the way I would think of it. I mean, obviously, I'm not a fighter, man. And these guys, like, he's a psych major from Hofstra, right? Like, he's a guy who understands. Like, he handled it so masterfully, I thought, and the way he dealt with it during this, during his time as a champion, and just he was very down to earth. He presented him that way. And if I'm his coaches, obviously, you probably know a different Chris Weidman, the competitor and all that. But I am probably saying, hey, we can go through another, we can do this, but you try to keep layering and putting coats on the reality of like, I'm not sure you should do this at this point. If I'm his coach, and I know, Ray Longo, those guys are a very tight knit group, I'm telling them stuff like that. Yes. I'm basically saying like, I don't want to be with you if you're going to continue this too long, not after kind of what we've seen over the last like 7 fights. Yeah.
And I think you made a good point as well, is that he's such a competitor that I don't think Chris Weidman is in the business of going in and asking for easy fights or manageable fights. Like, he's going in there to fight a guy that will put him close again to the title. So, like, if you look at the guys he's lost to and fought over the last while, they're all killers. They're not easy fights. So, like, I can't see him, saying, okay, the reason why I want to stick around is because I want to go out gracefully. Maybe give me, as you said a few minutes ago, give me a grappler that's not going to kill me and I can get a win. He wants to go in there and try rebuild what he had. He wants to go in there and get a title fight. And it just doesn't seem... Yeah, it just doesn't seem like that's in the cards for him at the moment.
It's not. And it's really a tribute to him, too, that, like, even going into this last fight that he just had, it was like going into it, he was talking about John Jones. It was almost like he was, there were plenty of articles coming out about, him potentially facing John Jones. And so let's say he goes up there and he wins that last fight in Boston. Who knows? Who knows, like, suddenly, like, in today's UFC, what that might have done for his stock in terms of getting it. That's what's weird about his career, right? Like, he was a champion. He still has a name. He gets into a situation where he's in a new weight class and all that sort of thing. And if it had gone differently, who knows? He could have possibly done that. But I think the way it went down, it just reemphasizes the reality that maybe we were putting aside going into that fight, or, whatever, deluding ourselves into thinking. And we're in the real reality. Like, we're in the actual thing now where it's like he has lost again. And I think if he's going to fight, which it sounds like he's going to, he needs to treat it. His coaches, everybody need to treat it like, okay, this is really this is the gauge. If you lose this one, you got to contemplate what the future holds for you, you know?
I think if either Luke or Chris had got a win, they'd probably been next for Jones.
Yeah, that's the thing with their names, isn't it? It's weird.
Yeah, I think it was that close, too.
Yeah.
I really do.
Crazy. But sorry to leave on a sour note. It kind of is a sour note, but yeah. Chuck, thanks for joining us, and we hope that Khabib and Tony happens without trying to put a jinx on it again. But yeah, thanks for joining us again, and we'll hopefully get you in a few weeks.
Gents, fun as always. Thanks, Sam.
Cheers, man.
Appreciate it.
We have a few questions, not that many, Sean. We'll probably 4 or 5. That's it. So let's go through them really quick. Mohat Mohale said Conor's comeback date was January 18th. It was a pay-per-view which got cancelled and is instead now a fight night, according to Irish media. Do you think the UFC is playing games with Conor just to show who was the boss? Because Dana previously said that Conor is not the man anymore.
Yeah, well, I've said to you before, I think Conor is playing games himself, announcing his fight like that, and saying, like, Audi is even saying it's basically done. Like, it's quite obviously not.
Yeah.
And I mean, 247 is the title for Jones's pay-per-view. That seems to be a bit, that one can be pushed back or forward a number based on if McGregor comes back. Yeah, I think McGregor and Dana White are both playing games, to be honest. They're both on the power play. So, yeah.
I agree that they're both playing games. I'm not sure if this was specifically...
I hadn't actually seen that report about
I didn't see that either, but I'm not sure if that's specifically that, but 100% they're playing games. Like, they're all playing games, it's kind of... They've been doing that for a long time. Like, since McGregor became what he was, or what he is now, or I guess what he was, I'd say, they've been always playing games, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Hardeep Yohal, I'm sorry.
Great work, Rob.
If the fight stays on the feet, who wins, Izzy or Jones?
Oh, that's a good question. Right now, at 205, Jones, like, yeah,
just size.
Yeah, Izzy in a couple of years, an interesting one though.
Yeah, like Izzy is a wizard, but
and it's going to get tougher for him to make 185 and all that. So yeah, then it gets interesting.
Yeah, you'd have to assume that just size.
Yeah,
I think seems to be very big.
I could see myself at some point down the line picking Adesanya though in a fight against Jones, just not right now.
Yeah, very good. Rob Waddle asked, how well would a bar in Dublin do if they were to show a big UFC event live, and if they had the license to be open at that time?
Fucking so well.
Think so?
Me on my own, it'd do so well.
I don't think that's what they're looking for.
I'm joking.
Depends, doesn't it? It depends on the event. If it's a McGregor fight, great stuff. They've done it before. Like a few bars have done it for big McGregor events. I know.
The thing you will have is, I think they have to be ticketed, because what you're going to have is the stragglers coming out of coppers at 4 in the morning.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
saying,
watch the fight. Yeah,
that place is open. Yeah, sound. Yeah, few points. Yeah, I think it's going to have to be ticketed. I have seen it before where there's only a certain amount of pints you can buy in those places, which isn't great. I think it'll do pretty well.
Yeah, I think it depends on the fight.
Yeah.
But I think if it's a big fight that people are interested in, it obviously do very well. If it's a fight where it's if it's in Europe, then great, because you can do it at a normal time. and if it's a big fight and they can get some kind of license, whatever. But aren't you like they're looking to revamp the whole late bar thing in Ireland?
I was in a sports bar in Boston when I was in America. That was fucking amazing. It was.
How much did it cost you, by the way? Was it a ticket?
No, it was just a bar. Yeah, it was open. So the NFL preseason and all that was on, and I went in and I was like, she was like, where do you want to sit? And I was like, beside one of the screens, it's going to be showing the UFC. And she was like, after 10 o'clock, it's going to be on all of them. And I was like, oh my God, amazing. Put me anywhere. The bar staff were amazing with drinks. The UFC, the commentary was up.
Did you get them a Yelp review?
No. I'm giving them a review now. Can't remember the name of it though. They were a chain. The food was lovely. It was
Buffalo Wild Wings?
Yeah.
Was it?
No, it wasn't Buffalo Wild Wings.
Right.
Yeah, I got chicken wings though. I told you.
I
got chicken wings, yeah.
Sean is like the biggest chicken wing fan I've ever met.
Chicken wings.
Yeah, he loves chicken wings.
Pints and chicken wings, and sport. No, it was just such a good vibe in there, and there was other fans there, and there was just such a good atmosphere between everyone. Obviously, it's at a different time of the night over there, which helps a lot. In Ireland, you're going to have a rowdiness there at that time of the morning, I'd imagine. So, But the vibe was really good. So, you know.
Carl Janssen. I'm going to do that because it has the little
seen his name,
what's your ideal MMA arena? When watching one, the grappling is sort of weird when people's arms are going out of between the ropes and stuff. I think the round cage like Bellator with a very fine net you can get your finger through would be good. Interesting. Rogan always talks about an inclined field arena. I don't know what that is. Inclined field type.
Does Rogan want them running up a fucking hill into each
other? I think what Rogan argued for before was like there's a big, like almost like a big mat that like you can't really go outsides. I'm not sure how well that would be for an arena. But to be honest, I think the cage is perfect. The round cage is interesting with Bellator because you can't really get caught. You know, it's easier to escape being grappled up against the cage.
Roll off.
Yeah, whereas the corner kind of can entrap people. But I prefer the cage for sure over the ring.
I think the cage works. The thing with this is it's hard to get creative and imagine something because you're always thinking within the realms of being locked in something. The cage works for me. Be it round or
I remember Bas Rutten was involved in some karate thing and they had like a big some matted area, so it was similar to what that. But like, you know, MMA is so dynamic that eventually it will hit the edge of the earth, as Eddie Bra would say. We'll leave it at this one. Actually, Sal Vestola asked where Brendan Norman's fine ass motherfucker is. I'm in contact.
We'll talk one day, baby.
We'll talk.
Both sides are talking.
We'll leave it on this one. Pompous Psycho. Of course.
Hi, guy.
Sean Taylor.
Oh, Jesus.
Given that Sal Vestola has a bitchy boss at his job, how can Sal implement some of his deadly ancient Irish martial art techniques of Pogue Mahone so as to vanquish the enemy at the gates? Strike first, strike hard, no mercy.
I'm confused in this one because Pogue Mahone means kiss my ass. And so does he want Sal to...
kiss his boss's ass?
Does he want Sal to lick ass, basically, at work? Shouldn't have said that. No context there.
So how can Sal? So if we're not using Pogue Mahone, how can Sal implement some of the deadly ancient Irish martial art techniques of kiss the ass, kiss my ass, basically?
Make him tea, make him coffee, bring him biscuits. Be nice. Do stuff for him.
Yeah.
Do your job.
For him. Yeah. Do your job.
Do your job pretty well. Also, don't take no shit. Get his respect.
Yeah. Will that vanquish the enemy at the gates?
Potentially. I mean, one way to vanquish the enemy at the gates would be to fuck him up.
Yeah. But then you're not kissing ass, so...
you know.
What a strange
the
question.
Innuendo, man.
Yeah. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for all the questions.
Cheers,
thanks to Chuck. And let's move on to Educating Young Sean and have some fun. Okay, so this is Educating Young Sean, and this is the part of the show where we give Sean a fight. He goes back and he watches it, and then he comes back and reviews it to us, or to me. There's only one of us, Rob. Stop talking to yourself. So last week I gave you Gabriel Gonzaga versus Mirko Krokop, number 1. And you watched number 1, right?
I did, yeah. We had a bit of confusion over this.
A lot of confusion.
The one I watched was the head kick one, which Gonzaga fucking hit him like a baseball bat. He basically took a baseball bat to Krokop's head. Essentially. It was class.
The irony was insane. I don't know. I didn't rewatch it, but like Krokop is known for his head kicks. That's his thing. So when Gonzaga landed the head kick, it was like the irony is insane. But was the build up and was the commentator's reaction? Did you get that from it?
I'll be honest, I skipped the build up
Yeah.
because I think it was like they did a big build up. It was like 40 minutes long, and it's like
40 minutes long on Fight Pass.
I hate watching this. It's like I just skipped to the fight, and I skipped to Brucey announcing them in. Brucey. I skipped that. Brucey, yeah.
That's what you call him.
Pal Bruce.
These are their friends.
Yeah, and skipped to that, and they made a lot. Like Gonzaga was chopping away at the leg as well, which given how good Crow Cop was at the leg kicks or at the head kicks and stuff, that makes sense. Chop away at that leg, and then he fucking sent him into next week with that head kick.
Yeah, it was phenomenal.
Crow Cop was like flatlined for a couple of minutes afterwards.
Oh yeah, it was it. Yeah, like
I think that's one of the best KOs I've ever seen. Like he crumpled Crow Cop.
See his leg as well.
Yeah, that was, I was just going to say. Crow Cop bent back on himself. It was sick.
Yeah, like he probably done more damage to his leg than he got damage, but that's some long term damage.
It was funny actually as well because Rogan got himself in a tizzy over how Crow Cop bent back on his leg and stuff.
Yeah.
Rather than the fact that Crow Cop was still out.
I know.
Unconscious on the ground.
Yeah.
It was like,
they didn't care about head injuries back then.
Are we going to mention that he's still out cold?
Are we going to mention CTE?
Yeah.
No. Leg.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but it was like, of course, the head trauma is infinitely worse, but the visual of his leg crumbling and exploding underneath him was disgusting.
He proper went limp.
Yeah, so what score do you give that out of 5?
That's getting a 4.
Getting a 4?
Yeah.
Awesome. Next fight you're going to have is a fight that you've seen before, as in two guys who have fought before, but I'm giving you number 3. We gave you Frankie Edgar versus Gray Maynard, number 2. Was the draw, and this is their trilogy. This was the rubber match, so to speak.
Deadly.
Cool.
When did this one happen? What event?
UFC 136.
Okay, yeah, because the event is quite useful when you're on Fight Pass.
It is, yeah. Don't get the event wrong. Yeah. That was fun, Sean. Thanks for joining me, and thanks to Chuck Mindenhall. That was a lot of fun chatting with him as usual. Check us out next week again, same time, same channel, same bat time, same bat channel, and yeah, fun. Next week, there might be a UFC card to talk about next week. I'm not sure. They're few and far between